Welcome to the One Advantage podcast, exploring the intersections of peer power, culture, and agility. Your hosts, Mike Richardson, Jason Richmond, and Leo Bottary, co-founders of the One Advantage community of practice and advantage peer groups. For more information, please visit us at the One Advantage podcast.
Welcome back to the One Advantage podcast, everybody. Today's topic, culture, and how the power of peer groups impact business results embedded into that culture. Culture is the difference between good organizations and great ones. We can't leave the number one guiding force of our organizations up to chance today. To have an evolving, sustainable culture, the integration of effective peer groups need to be at the forefront of your culture and aligned with executive level strategy. Today, myself, Jason Richmond, and Leo Bottary is going to dig in deep about the impact that peer groups have within your culture and your business performance. Culture is really the difference between good organizations and great ones. And we can't leave the number one guiding force of our organizations up to chance today, right, Leo? And to have evolving, sustainable culture, the integration of peer groups need to be at the forefront of your operation and of your culture. Do you agree?
I do. I also agree, as we came in today, that it is White Hat Day.
Yeah.
And that becomes really important. And as I mentioned to you, I think the fact that you get your culture rules hat on is perfectly appropriate for today's show. And real exciting. One of the things that, and of course we'll be getting into this when we're talking about this idea of peer groups operating really alongside teams in companies, providing that real mechanism for helping people, I think, with personal growth and to be better contributors to their teams. And this, I think, becomes, really essential part of what we're doing. And, one of the things that I did in peer innovation, because if you think about it, how often will people talk about groups as kind of a lesser version of a team in some way, right? It's like, well, they're just a group. They're not a team. I think what we've talked about and what we've done, kind of pivoting off of peer innovation, is to say, teams, no question, are fantastic. They operate usually to create some kind of a shared work product, or maybe they're trying to win a championship, or they're trying to do something that only a team could do together with those diverse, contributions. Groups, however, exist to help the individuals get better. So they come together and they work on things much like, years ago, there was a study done. It was actually in Africa. And there was Etienne Wenger and Jean Lave go to Africa, right? And they're trying to study the relationship between the master and the apprentice. And what they found was that the most interesting relationships were the apprentices among one another, and that's how they helped each other get better. And they worked in groups so they could hone their craft. So I think for us to be able to talk about that difference between how groups can make teams better, how groups can make culture better, I think is really going to be a great part of what we're doing.
I think it's critical. You said something there about, groups really bring the best out of individuals. And you talked about, the Africa situation. Harvard Business Review just released a study. 55% of employees actually turn to their peers when they want to learn something new. So 55%, it's really puts a question mark on traditional learning and development, talent development, how we develop our people, how do we focus on our high performers, right? And if 55% of those individuals are already reaching out to peers, I mean, right there's so much proof that there's power in these groups.
And part of the reason for that is they trust each other more.
Yeah,
that's right. One of the things that the Edelman Trust Barometer talks about this a lot when they talk about where do people first hear news about in a company, or where do they find out what's going on in their company? And the number one resource is one another. And it's really rather remarkable, and it's because they trust each other more, right? It's amazing.
Yeah, I get asked, Leo. First of all, executives and leaders underscore the importance of this all the time. They underscore the importance that this has on company performance, culture, growth. And people ask me all the time, well, prove it. right? What business metrics, how does it really impact? Where's the rubber hit the road, right? And I've identified a few, and I thought we could share some ideas around it. First of all, turnover, right? Studies have shown that, if there's powerful peer groups, if there's peer collaboration, if there's group in an organization, you can reduce your turnover in your organization by over 20%, 26%, right? In your experience, I mean, have you seen a direct impact or correlation between, groups and peer groups and actual turnover within an organization?
Well, it makes perfect sense, right? Who you surround yourself with matters, right? Yep. Really pretty easy, familiar concept with the idea that if we really like and enjoy working with the people around us, we're more likely to stay with them. And if we don't, we're going to find somewhere else to work. So what we know, I think, about peer groups and what we know about great teams is when they are focused truly on getting to know one another, not just as coworkers, but as people, and they develop those connections and they develop those relationships, they not only work more effectively for the company, but to your point, they're far more likely to stay.
With this impact, I've been working with an organization. It's a Midwest professional services company. They've probably got about 12,000 employees, nationwide. And they did a cultural pulse survey, right? And it was really done on an individual basis. But the feedback, they had some very big through lines around a little bit of flexibility, about higher levels of collaboration, about, working and it's an organization that said, thank you for your feedback, but we really don't do things that way. And we're really not going to, put focus into implementing some of these things. And we've been watching this, and just last month I was with them. Last 12-month period, they have 26% churn in people. 26% churn. Now it's fascinating. We look at exit interviews and we talk about it, and there's resounding feedback coming in that's just saying, we don't feel like we're heard. Right? So, I mean, that's a real case study and a real life business client of mine. Now, guess what we're doing? We're making some adjustments.
Yeah. And to put a number on that, this is really, I think, very much aligned and very adjacent and very relevant to what we talked about very recently on one of our podcasts, when we talked about how $1.2 trillion annually, so it isn't just always clarity of communications, but when people actually don't care, what other people think, then that's going to cause, and think about the cost of, of losing those people, 26%. It's crazy.
I mean, really, and that's what the One Advantage is all about: helping organizations structure internally, put together the appropriate peer groups, put together the right people, build that culture of performance. We talk about productivity. I mean, obviously, the power of peers and working together with your groups has a direct impact on productivity. I read a study recently: 79% of all CEOs worldwide. 79% of all CEOs worldwide worry that skill gaps are threatening the future growth of their organizations. And yet 55% of people learn something new from their groups, from their peers. So this is a real concern in organizations today. The fact that CEOs are realizing that gaps in individual skills and the need for learning has got to happen.
Well, and the private sector has traditionally been better at this, because where else are you going to get it? This training, this executive development, all of these skills that we bring to our jobs, I think, are best dealt with in the private sector. I think the problem, and we've talked about this many times, is that things have changed a lot, right? And the world has changed a lot, and you have fewer people being asked to do more with less money, fewer resources, and all of that, right? Yeah. So all of a sudden, whether it's micro learning or a day long, executive development day, whatever it happens to be, they will learn something, and then all of a sudden, bam, they get sucked right back into their job. They're overwhelmed by what they have to deal with, and all that time, whatever that was, however important it was to expose them to that content, unfortunately, we're not committed to actually have them retain it and apply it in any real way, because there's no mechanism to do that. And you mentioned about, and I know we'll get into this probably a little bit, is kind of peer groups appropriate, if you will, right? So I think the idea for certainly the most successful peer groups I've seen created inside companies have a very specific reason for existing, right? So on one hand, it may be to augment learning and development so that they can operationalize this investment so they can actually get a return on it. It could be alignment behind a strategic initiative. It could be any number of things where we want to have, I think, a very specific reason a peer group may exist. That doesn't mean it lasts forever. Maybe it's together for 6 months, whatever it may happen to be. But when they have a specific charge, when they have a purpose, and they can really connect and help each other be better, the ripple effect into the organization is remarkable. There's just no question about that. We see it time and time again.
Yeah, I think one of the, in thinking about what you said, probably one of the biggest shifts that we've seen in talent development strategy, L&D strategy in our customers is the leadership, the learning and development, whatever the content is being done in a cohort model. So if it's, a series of half days or series of micro learnings or, a series of 1-day events or, a long-term development path, they're really bringing these cohorts together. And we're building in a lot of project in between sessions, a lot of activity, a lot of required peer group work, right? To set the foundation, set the stone, start creating the behaviors of collaborating, working in really specified, specific groups of people. So the cohort model in regards to learning and development, I would say coming out of the pandemic and even driven more so because of the hybrid workforces, is probably one of the biggest shifts we've seen. It's not just random people. It's actually a dedicated group going through that development together.
Yeah, it's changed in education and it's changed in the private sector for sure.
Yeah.
When I was going through school any number of years ago, right? High school, early college, right? There was no such thing. Collaborative learning would have been called cheating. There was no bullhorn model. There was none of that kind of stuff. You would sit there, you take notes, your relationship with the instructor was what it was, and that was it. Yeah. And in some respects, that was, modeled in the private sector for a while. Today, there's this, we know social learning theory, decades of research, mountains of evidence around this. We learn better when we learn together. And I think one of the real great examples of this was something that Josh Burson released in 2019, where he talked about this idea that, if you or I, for example, read a 1,000-word magazine article, on average, if we read it one time, we're likely to remember about 28% of it for about 24 to 48 hours. If we read it a second time, the number climbs to 46%. However, if we're part of a group or a team that has read that article, now all of a sudden we, engage one another in sharing experiences, grappling with the concepts and bringing our own ideas to the table. Now all of a sudden it goes to 69%. And beyond that, we don't just understand it more deeply. We actually give one another that courage and encouragement to apply things that we've learned. And even if there's some trial and error, that's okay. It's only going to inspire more of that cohort learning that we're talking about. It's so incredibly effective.
Yeah, and I work with people. I was just in this conversation earlier this week about formulating some structured peer groups for very specific reasons. And we got talking with the VPs of this business unit, not to set up groups just to set up groups, right? This isn't a social hour. And we really identified some of the benefits of doing this. And this was around a very specific 6-month project that it's cross-functional people are all playing in. And we really come out to 3 benefits of this. First of all, knowledge sharing, right? Bringing this group together and having it structured allows the individuals, this group bring in their different perspectives, their different responsibilities, their different levels of expertise, and really have the platform to truly share knowledge. That was the first one. The second one is the effectiveness of cross-training, right? The individuals in this group are, if you peel back the onion, they're actually being cross-trained. They're actually gaining skill in other departments or other areas of the business that they most likely didn't have. So they're getting a broader view of the organization. And the third one is just bringing together, we've got more culture influencers now, right? Throughout the organization, they're taking these experiences back into their day-to-day. And that experience is ultimately changing the culture to have a higher level of empowerment, a higher level of psychological safety, a higher level of feeling that their ideas are being heard and driving value in the employee base. So, I mean, I don't know if you agree or disagree with those or want to expand on that, but not to set up groups just for group's sake, but make sure there's a reason, right?
Yeah, there has to be a specific reason for there exist. Like I said, or you're going to invite basically what will end up being a venting session against the senior leadership team. Is typically how those things go. But the other the one I want to address though is the cross training one, because I think this is important. We should consider everyone who works anywhere to hopefully be an ambassador for the company. So the idea, for example, when I grew up kind of in the agency business, if you will, like I happen to do PR and corporate communications. However, I learned a lot about media and direct marketing and advertising and all these kinds of things, right? And digital and all. I didn't have to learn enough about it so that I could be an expert at it. All I'd have to do is learn enough about it where if I'm talking to a prospective client, they're not looking for a PR answer. They're looking for a solution, period, a communication solution. The better I am at being able to identify not only where I can play a role, but where, you know what, I really see an opportunity for direct here. I really see an opportunity for a digital campaign, So the more that I knew just enough about what everyone else's did to understand how to plug it in and be an ambassador for the whole value proposition, not simply what I was going in to talk to them about. And I think this makes everyone and just helps the client, it helps the agency or the company or whatever, anytime you're able to do that.
Yeah. Recently, I worked with a mid-cap company, and they're no different than anyone else. They're trying to hire tons of people, and we were working with them and creating, a little bit more formalized onboarding program. Right. So in this onboarding program, our team, my team put together a component of creating the right type of peer group within this company. And again, they're going through a huge hiring phase right now. It's not going to last forever, but for this onboarding program with this flux for the next 6 months of new employees, we actually got a formalized onboarding peer group. And as the new employees get hired and come on, it's a process of being a part of this group to really learn across the entire company what the company's all about, what the culture is, what the expectations are, what the work environment is, et cetera. Have you ever thought of or do anything with onboarding in regards to peer groups? I mean, it was pretty fascinating. It was a neat creative idea that came out of this project.
Yeah, I think there's no question about that on the onboarding front. The other thing you can do is when you bring people together and just have very intentional conversations with one another that create clarity about what it takes to be successful here. Yeah. And really try to tease that out and really talk about the values and the behaviors and everything it takes to be successful in this specific company. Once you know that, now all of a sudden it's really easy when it comes to interviews, when it becomes to, everything, that if someone wants to enjoy the privilege of being part of this team, this is how they're going to have to chin the bar. And you're very clear, very specific about that. And I think the more clear, as you would well know, you are about those things, the more likely you are, to have a good hire. I had a meeting the other day where there was a participant who talked about a study that they had heard of where they said basically that up to 50% of senior level hires don't last any more than 18 months. Wow. And largely it's cultural related. And it's because they didn't get that fit right. It's because, and where I think this can be particularly difficult is look at the labor market we're in right now, where everyone's just looking like, God, I need a person. I need some. And I think, at some level, and I know it's easy for maybe us to say here in the podcast, but I think we've got to really be more disciplined than ever when it comes to making sure we're hiring the right people, not just to get someone in to help us out.
Just warm bodies to fill a gap, right?
Yeah.
To fill a position. I'm going to put you on the spot, Leo, and I think you can handle it. I get asked often from an executive level person, well, how do I know what business challenges am I going through that might warrant me creating, some specific peer groups or, influencers that could come together. I mean, my initial reaction, because culture rules, is, cultural issues, lack of engagement, right? If your employee engagement is down, if your client satisfaction is down. But from your perspective and the works you do and all that type of stuff, what are some of the other challenges a business might be dealing with that might warrant really considering implementing, strategic peer groups?
I think peer groups can be great at identifying and connecting the organization's overall purpose with why and what really inspires each individual. I think we may have chatted about this in one of the other podcasts when we were talking about the Ineos 159 challenge. And so Dave Brailsford, who was leading that effort to help Eliud Kipchoge actually run the marathon in under 2 hours, something that had never been done. People equated it to like landing someone on the moon, or, of course, Roger Bannister's under 4 hours. But one of the things that Sir Dave Brailsford, I thought so brilliantly did, was, among that team, he connected this overall purpose, which was basically to inspire a whole different idea about human potential, right? It wasn't just about hitting the goal of under 2 hours. It was about whatever line of business you're in, whatever vocation you're in, or whatever, to recognize that in each of us, we can probably just get a little bit better. And what he did with the team there was everybody from physiotherapists to nutritionists to a whole host of folks that worked together to make this whole venture successful, was basically making sure that he understood very specifically why they cared so much about this. What did it mean to them? He said this notion that there's no I in team is ridiculous. There's a lot of eyes on your team. You need to know who, what inspires them and how to drive engagement by making that connection. And he said it's night and day when you are able to make that connection. And I think, peer groups and leaders who are intent on understanding the value and importance of that can be very powerful. And, again, you look at engagement, you look at alignment behind a strategic initiative, oftentimes it isn't that people are trying not to do, they just don't ever, again, it's about, they have no mechanism for having these conversations. And when they do, it's amazing what, employees will come up with and what they're capable of in terms of, how they deliver.
Yeah. Everyone listening, you can find us at theoneadvantage.com. Join our community of peers. It's exactly what we're talking about here, is the power of peer groups from different walks of life coming together. You can also find us at idealoutcomesinc.com. And now that'll be in the show notes, but definitely check it out and check out our community. Leo, as we're kind of getting close to landing our conversation, if you were in front of a group of CEOs, a group of executives right now talking on this subject and bringing your conversation to those, if you had to give them one piece of advice in regards to implementing peer groups, being strategic about groups and how it impacts their culture, what would that one piece of advice be?
I would say if you could embrace this idea that psychological safety is huge and how much it matters and how much psychological safety plays a role in creating a healthy culture of accountability, and realize that if you create peer groups where people can actually build muscles around having those clear, direct, open conversations with one another, that as the CEO or as the leader, if you actually want really good information about what's really going on in your company in real time, that's how to make that happen. And everyone wins. Employees are happier, they're retained longer, leaders get better information, and everyone's on the same side, right? It's not a blame culture. It's not this kind of stuff where it's, you're not doing this and pointing fingers and all that. It's everyone recognizing we are all in this together. We all have a shared responsibility for whatever result it is that we're trying to achieve. And so I think when people start looking at that and they could see the value of peer groups in terms of making that possible, that's a heck of a lot of benefit. So I'd really like to, kind of approach it from that perspective, I think, when it comes to CEOs today, because it's a challenge for all of them.
It most certainly is. And, if I was talking to a group of CEOs talking about the importance, if an organization wants to have a high performing culture, that enables a high level of teamwork. The level of leadership can drop their ego and really receive feedback, accept that feedback, and be acceptance of that, and I would say value the influx of different perspectives throughout your organization. If you want those three components in your culture, then you probably need to be looking at some strategically placed peer groups to help drive the organization.
Yeah, I mean, it basically, helps everybody bring their A game. And, one of the interesting things about getting back to psychological safety for a minute is this idea that you can read all the academic journals and all the mountains of research and all that. And if you had to boil it down to one sentence, it's basically psychological safety is where we just give each other the benefit of the doubt. So when we trust that we're committed to excellence and committed to doing great things, and all we are doing, even when we challenge each other and ask questions and do these kinds of things, it's about great work. It's about why we exist. It isn't because anyone's trying to call each other out. So again, you have that kind of a culture where I think can be built through a mechanism of peer groups, which help people be better team participants, which help them be better contributors. Pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Go check us out in the call notes, oneadvantage.com, idealoutcomesinc.com. Thank you, Leo Bottary, for the insight and bringing your A game today. And Mike, we really missed you today. I hope you're enjoying the UK and a little bit of downtime. And I think you're getting a little bit of work in there too. We'll see you guys on the flip side another couple weeks.